Secretly recorded from deep inside the bowels of a decommissioned missile silo, we bring you the man, one single man who wants to bring light to the darkness and dark to the lightness. Although he's not always right, he is always certain. So now, with security protocols in place, the protesters have been forced back behind the barricades and the blast doors are now sealed. Without further delay, let me introduce you to the host of Huttcast, Mr. Tim Huttner.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. You can now take your post. The views and opinions expressed in this program are solely those of the individual and participants. These views and opinions expressed do not represent those of the host or the show. The opinions in this broadcast are not to replace your legal, medical, or spiritual professionals. Welcome to Huttcast on this special anniversary of Huttcast. We have on our line with us today Ken McCarthy. Ken is an author. He's launching a new book. He has this perspective that I think we need to listen to. And Ken, are you with me?
I'm here.
Ken, thanks for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, I haven't had a chance to read the book, but I did read the excerpts, and I just kind of browsed through it. Your PR guy did a great job. He's like, hey, you should probably read this. And someone reached out to me. Annie Quiner's a personal friend. She's been on the show. I can't tell you enough how many times I've covered this subject, but I want to hear your rendition of it. So when we start playing certain things, tell me what motivated you behind writing. What inspired you, what the nurses saw, that's the title of your book, and why did you choose to focus specifically on experiences of nurses during the COVID period?
Gotcha. Not sure how far back you want me to go, but let me focus just on this particular book. So it's early 2020, and by early I mean January, February, and I am highly skeptical of everything I'm hearing about COVID, and we could talk about that later. And so I watched the news very carefully, and one of the things that jumped out at me was a video of a nurse from a New York City hospital saying in no uncertain terms, "We're killing these patients." And that certainly got my attention. And a few weeks later, another nurse, also a contract nurse who'd gone up to New York City to work in the city-owned hospitals, city-run, operated hospitals, made a similar claim, but she had video, and the video was extremely compelling. So I couldn't reach the first nurse, that was Nicole Sorotek, but I could reach the second one, who we call Erin Marie, because I can't pronounce her last name. I'm not that good at Slavic languages, but it's Erin Marie. And I reached out to her, and I did about a 2-hour interview with her on technical matters related to the treatment of these patients.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I also, at the same time, same thing, early, well, not even summer yet, it was late spring of 2020, I interviewed a UK nurse, 40 years experience, PhD nursing educator, and he basically related the same story. So I thought, wow, this is huge. Surely, because I am not a professional journalist. I'm a business owner. I've got a lot of things to do besides be a journalist in my spare time.
Right.
So I was hoping that one of these crusading investigative journalists that was taking up so much time and so much space on all the podcasts, talking about all kinds of things related to COVID, would talk about this very simple matter that credible people were saying that patients were being killed by the COVID protocols. And I waited, and 2020 came to an end. Nobody did it. 2021 came to an end. Nobody did it. 2022. And by halfway through 2023, I said, I guess I'm going to have to do it. And I went back to the nurses that I had originally spoken with, and I asked them to connect me with other nurses. I interviewed the nurses. I also reached out to a respiratory therapist, which is a very important part of any ICU team, happens to be a Minnesota fellow. And I reached out and was connected to what I'm going to call a forensic accountant who's very familiar with the chicanery of the federal government and the medical system. And that, with some appendix material, became what the nurses saw. Now, I think the key, there's so many things about this book, but I think the key thing is we're all probably aware of one story or two stories, maybe could be your family member, it could be the family member of a friend. I have a friend, his father was, pretty healthy, went into the hospital with COVID and died, and they almost killed the mother as well. So I think almost everybody's heard sort of a story about somebody that unexpectedly died, and in the hospital it was attributed to malfeasance or incompetence or neglect. But what we don't realize, and this strangely is the only book that covers the subject so far, I hope others will follow, is that this happened across the nation to thousands and thousands of thousands and thousands of people. And the way I come up with that number is, we're going to use the rough numbers here just for simplicity.
Okay.
Over 1 million people in the United States were said to have died of COVID.
Right.
And we know, of course, there's a lot of fraud there. A lot of people came in with advanced cancer, dementia, advanced diabetes,
Car
and
wreck.
they happened to test positive
Yeah.
for COVID. And that, yeah. So we know about that fraud. But let's just assume. Let's assume they all died of supposedly of COVID. 92% of them died while in the care of a hospital or some other medical care facility, like what they call a nursing home in the United States. That's strange. Not everybody makes it to a hospital. There are homeless people. There are elderly people living alone. There are people that live so far from a hospital they can't get there. That's a lot of people. And yet the overwhelming number of people who supposedly died of COVID, in quotes, died in the care of our medical system. So that's the first thing that people should be thinking about. Why did such a overwhelmingly disproportionate people who supposedly died of this disease, die in the hospitals? There should have been similar numbers of people dying who didn't make it to the hospital in time, or didn't go to the hospital, or were living alone, which is the case for a lot of elderly in the United States.
Yeah.
And we have homeless people. We have a lot of homeless people. And the homeless people weren't dying, and people living on their own weren't dying. So that's a number to start thinking about. So it may be that, and we won't know how many people died this way until there is until there is an incredible investigation. And the interesting thing is, this is knowable. We can pretty much figure this out. Unfortunately, it will take many, many, many millions of dollars if somebody wants to get the exact number. The way we do it is we get the hospital records of these patients. We hire nurse investigators, people that are nursing veterans, and they know how to read hospital records.
Do this kind of work, right?
And pardon me?
They do this kind of work.
They do, yeah. It's a job. It's a thing that's done. Let's say a garden variety malpractice case where a family is suspicious that something went wrong. You get the hospital records. You hire one of these nurse investigators. Now these records can be 3, 4, 5, 6. It's hard to imagine how they generate so much paperwork, but they do. 6,000 pages long. And what we are finding, because we're working with medical justice groups. In fact, the best medical justice group just happens to be in Minnesota. They're the most organized and the most impressive. What we are finding is very often when those records are acquired and they are reviewed by an experienced nurse investigator, all kinds of red flags are popping out that indicate, incompetence, neglect, malfeasance, and the level of malfeasance is mind-boggling. We're all human, and there is a thing called human error, and we have to grant our medical people the reality that there are errors. We can't hang them over an honest error. These are not errors. This was systematic, and it wasn't cooked up by our medical people. It was a top-down directive that was enforced literally with an iron fist. And that's one of the things we could talk about on the call, and it's talked about in the book. Wow.
It just makes you pump the brakes and wonder why. I mean, what's the motive behind it? Now, you did the motive about this conversation when we started. You blew through the research, my number 2 question, which you handled like a pro, by the way. And you just gotta, what's the point? I mean, if you come in with an accident and you die of COVID. Is it all about the money?
Well, I mean, it's so complex, and one of my tasks has been to figure out how to explain it efficiently. Uh,
So the
one
challenges that
so
you faced, go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt you, but the challenges
Go ahead.
were huge. They had to be huge.
Well, yeah, because no one else is doing this research. No one. I mean, zero. It's not happening. There's thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individual stories, but nobody has shown that this was a pattern. This was a system. And so maybe we should talk about the system
Okay.
and how I am guessing, and I think it's an intelligent guess of how it came to be. And I'm going to use an analogy. When you're outdoors and let's say a jet plane flies overhead, on its way to the airport or leaving the airport, there's a lot of things you don't know about that plane. But one thing you do know, but there are a lot of things you absolutely know about that plane. You know that somewhere there was a factory and there were a whole bunch of people putting that plane together. It did not materialize by itself.
Okay.
The other thing you know with certainty is that it left an airport and is heading to an airport, and there's a whole support staff crew that is making sure all that happens. So just by seeing a plane in the air, you know a whole lot about that plane. Make sense so far?
You're assimilating the visual with the actual and the common sense. Yes, so common sense is the thing on the show.
Great. So when we see a system, and in medicine they call systems protocols, that absolutely didn't work, absolutely killed people. It was really like an assembly line. Anybody that got caught up in the COVID diagnosis and found themselves in a hospital was very likely to be put on an assembly line to death. And we can talk about the details of that assembly line in a second. But what I want to talk about, I want to address your question, is just why. And I don't know exactly all of the why, but I can tell you the how, and it derives from that example I just gave you of an airplane. Some group of people, and these were federal government people, because just like we know there's a factory that manufactures planes, we know there's a bunch of people that manufacture policies and directives.
Yes.
Right? So at the federal level, some people got together. I don't know where, I don't know when, I don't know how long it took them, and they worked out this protocol and they disseminated it to the hospitals. Now, they didn't just work out a protocol, they also embedded very specific financial incentives to incentivize hospitals and hospital groups to follow the protocol.
Okay.
They made it very, very lucrative to follow this protocol. And just sort of as a foreshadowing, let me tell you, this protocol made no medical sense, made no scientific sense. And if you wanted to kill people, this is exactly how you would do it. Okay. And we'll get to what the details of the protocol are in a second.
Well, in your book.
But not only did they cook up this crazy thing, which is anti-scientific and anti-medical, flew in the face of all previous medical history, they also put in definite and massive financial incentives so that the hospital administrators and the hospital owners would be highly motivated to follow the protocol. Now, in addition to cooking this insane thing up that they did and developing the incentive program, they did something else. They put in a enforcement program. I don't know all the details of it, but I know how it played out for nurses, medical techs, and doctors. If you were a doctor or a nurse in any of these COVID hospitals or COVID wings, and you questioned any of these protocols, and they were questionable. Look, the thing started out as emergency, and the doctors and nurses were saying, give them this, right? And I don't fault anybody in the early weeks for just going ahead and doing what they were told, because what else can you do? You have to trust, right? But very quickly, the veteran nurses said, whoa, this is killing people. This isn't helping. This doesn't make any sense. The protocol was so insane that they did things like ban ibuprofen, and there's a specific class of steroids that you give to people who have inflammation and have respiratory problems. This is not controversial. This is not new medicine. This is what is done, has been done for many, many decades. You want to get you want to control the inflammation in a case, and you want to help the lungs. And those substances, as part of the protocol, were banned. If you were designated a COVID patient, you were not allowed to get basic anti-inflammatories, and you were not allowed to be treated by the normal steroid treatment that every other person with a lung challenge is treated with. We were all talking about ivermectin, and that was like the big discussion, and that was a discussion that needed to be had. But what got missed was this fundamental perversion of normal medical practice. So what would happen is somebody would come in perhaps with a more than mild problem. They've got some noticeable inflammation, noticeable breathing difficulty, and instead of nipping it in the bud with anti-inflammatories and steroids, they would deny the person the very thing that would cut this off. So just to recap, some group at the federal government level figured this entire thing out, which included banning things that previously had been used for decades and doing things that had never been done in medicine before and were known previous to COVID to be highly dangerous, highly risky, and things that you don't even attempt to do unless you're at you've tried everything in the world.
Sure. And
now this is your sort of your Hail Mary pass. We're going to do this really dangerous thing, and the person is, they may not even survive the treatment, but we're at the end of our rope. Those kinds of treatments were imposed on every single, or attempted to be imposed on every single person that was hospitalized who had a COVID diagnosis.
Sure. So when you're at the Right to Try Act, when you're at the Right to Try, they wouldn't try.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a whole that's a whole nother thing. Medicine is an art; it's not a science, and it's definitely not a factory. And different people react to, just on the most fundamental level, different people react to different treatments in different ways. So part of medicine is to observe your patient and see what's helping and what's hurting. And apparently, this is almost, I still have trouble believing this, but Johns Hopkins said it, so I guess it's true. The third leading cause of death in the United States is when a medical treatment that wasn't suitable for a person, and it kills them. That's the third leading cause of death in the United States, according to Johns Hopkins.
Wow.
So that's why it's so important that nurses and doctors and respiratory therapists and everybody working with the patient should be empowered to use their own eyes and ears and adapt things as necessary, and if something is shown to work, use the thing that works. This is the essence of medicine. The idea that medicine is a science and it can be reduced to the level of physics, where everything's going to be exactly the same with every patient every time. That's nonsense. Medicine has a scientific support, but it is an art, and it's the art of working with patients and paying attention to them. And this was also fundamentally, I think it's also been thrown out of medicine in general, but this was fundamentally thrown out and literally banned with an iron fist during COVID for COVID patients. And I have to say one thing before, this hasn't stopped. When there are less people being killed right now because there are less COVID diagnoses. But we are getting reports from the group in Minnesota that they are getting reports from family members. They go in with COVID and they come out in a body bag.
Yeah, so in your book you had mentioned harmful impacts of certain medical protocols during the pandemic. But if you were to narrow it down, what do you believe was the most detrimental aspect of these?
Well, it's hard. Let me give you the assembly line. There was harm at every stage, right? So the first harm was to deny people basic anti-inflammatories and basic steroids. And again, We're not talking about some newfangled thing that somebody invented in the middle of the pandemic. We're talking about the tried and true methods for treating inflammation and lung problems. So that was the first problem. Because now somebody that had a case that could have been controlled, could have been reversed, could have been resolved, instead it spins out of control.
Sure.
Another thing that they would often do is, obviously, people who came into the hospital with respiratory distress and then got a COVID diagnosis were very anxious. I mean, just normal.
Sure.
And they were offered sedatives. Couple of issues there. If you are in a hospital setting and you are offered a sedative, you have to realize if you accept that, you are kind of changing your legal status. You're now becoming somebody who is a potential danger to themselves and others because you admitted to high anxiety and the need to be medicated. And now the hospital can hold you for a period against your will.
Wow.
Normally hospitals can't do that. You can just walk right out if you're not comfortable with what's going on. But once you accept a sedative, right? The next thing they would do was put you on a BiPAP, which is like the face mask. I think a lot of people have seen that. Now, the reality of a BiPAP is it feels the way you would feel if someone was driving down the road at 60 miles an hour and you open your window and stick your head out the window and open your mouth.
Sure.
That's what a BiPAP feels like. It's not comfortable. It's not pleasant. In critical situations, it's called for because you want to save the person's life, but it's not a go-to. It's not an automatic. They have the nose cannulas where you can stick that thing up your nose and you're getting plenty of oxygen. So a BiPAP is the beginning of extreme measures. Now, normally when you put somebody on a BiPAP, you would say to them, hey, this is going to be uncomfortable, but don't worry. What you're experiencing is how it works. We're going to be here. If there's a problem, just let us know. This is going to help you. You need this right now.
Sure.
And then you give the person a break every hour or two for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, just so they can catch their wind. This was not done. These things were just slapped on people with no explanation, and they were very often left alone. Right. This was one of the neglect of these patients. And this is something reported by all the nurses, the official ordered neglect. You just treat them and leave them alone in a room and don't even talk to them. So now they've come in, they are worried, they already have, when you're having breathing problems, that's anxiety right away. Now you've got the news, drumbeat saying that you're going to die. You're a little bit drugged up. They're putting something on you, BiPAP, without explaining what it is. Many of these patients, quite understandably, became very anxious, and the doctors would write down in their books, agitated. All right, and that once somebody's agitated and they're in your care, now you can start giving them more powerful sedatives and other types of drugs to manage them. I mean, there was stories of people being tied down. I mean, it's just again, it depends on how anxious you are and how readily you'll express your anxiety, but this, terror, basically.
Right.
So now the thing about all these drugs that they were giving these patients to help them relax is all these drugs are known to repress or suppress breathing function. Okay, why is that? We have lungs, and our lungs are kind of like sponges, and the air comes in, and the lungs very intelligently grab the oxygen, and it gets pumped through the body. But it's the diaphragm. It's a muscle that we hardly ever think about, but it's below the lungs, and that's what actually opens and closes your lungs. Your diaphragm's always working. The minute your diaphragm stops, you are minutes away from death. So
right,
the diaphragm is very important. So when you give somebody muscle relaxants, well, the diaphragm's a muscle. So it's now not as powerful. It's not working as well as it used to. So these are people who are already anxious, which hurts their oxygenation. They already have some kind of lung difficulty. And now you're depressing their breathing ability. And you got them on a BiPAP, ramping up their anxiety. Okay, things will not go well. So what does the doctor do? He comes along and says, you're not doing very well. I think we need to intubate you. We need to put you on a vent. And that was one of the first things that I studied back in early 2020, which is, what does it mean to put somebody on a vent? That's sort of awfully vague. And I got into this in great length. It's in the book. We also have a Minnesota respiratory therapist veteran of 23 years explaining it. But basically, people should know this. It's the equivalent of sticking a garden hose down your throat into your lungs. And then they have to put another tube to your stomach to feed you. In order for all this to happen, they have to give you very powerful sedatives that knock you out. They have to give you very powerful analgesics like fentanyl. And they also have to give you antiparalytics to keep you from moving around, because nobody wants a garden hose shoved down their throat.
Right.
Now, these are not just a one shot, you take a pill and you're knocked out and they do operation, everything's fine. They hook you up to drips. You may have anywhere from 5 to 12 different drips with 5 to 12 different drugs, the antiparalytics, the analgesics, the knockout sedatives. And your only food is coming from a tube, and it's, the equivalent of sugar water, and you're not getting hydrated, and you best hope that there are nurses around that care to clean you, because you're not going to be able to clean yourself and go to the bathroom.
Right.
And I don't want to get too graphic here, but especially in the New York hospitals, but in the New York hospitals and probably some others, these patients were put on vents and just left, which is never the right thing to do. These patients require a lot of supervision. Ideally, you would want a professional respiratory therapist. These are folks that have 4 years of training on how to manage people on vents. The ideal scenario is if first of all, you only put somebody on a vent if it's life and death, if there's just no other choice. Because as you can imagine, putting a garden hose-sized pipe down somebody's throat is a delicate operation, and it can and does go wrong and can actually kill people just in the intubation process. So in the normal world, you might put somebody on a vent because, hey, last ditch effort, this guy, the diaphragm stopped, there's no breathing, we need to breathe for you, right? Fair enough. These people weren't in that situation. They didn't need to be vented. They should not have been vented. Okay, and then it gets worse. Under normal circumstances, if you vent somebody, the next day, the respiratory therapist, in conjunction with the doctor and the nurses, see if they can get you off the vent, if your breathing has recovered, and they do some tests, and if you can, they get you off that vent, because they know how dangerous vents are. You're likely to get a lung infection. Lying there and unmoving, you're likely to get blood clots. You are going to be malnourished. All the things that happen when you don't move around, which are bad, are all likely to happen to you. And your liver and kidney are processing the effects of 5 to 15 different types of drugs, each of which has a black label warning if you can kill yourself on any one of those drugs.
Right.
Because they are ultimately toxins, right? So you want to get somebody off the vent. So the people, and we know they're federal people, one of the things they put in this protocol and incentivized was, if you keep somebody on the vent for more than 96 hours, you will get a bonus. So there was payment just to put somebody on an vent, big payment, and payment to keep somebody on an vent for more than 96 hours. Basically incentivizing the absolute wrong approach to this disease or this disorder. So the other big way they killed people was by overdoing the sedatives, and I've talked about that earlier. There's a very well-known case now. Grace Scott Sherrar, her father's going around the country telling the story. He's got a lawsuit against the doctors and the nurses.
Wisconsin, I believe.
The hospital. Pardon me?
In Wisconsin, I believe.
In Wisconsin, absolutely.
Yeah, he was on the show. Good interview. Tough program to run.
Yeah, and the way they killed her, they didn't even they kept wanting to intubate and vent her, and the family kept saying no. So what they did was they kept just pumping her with all kinds of sedatives and opioids. By the way, in combinations that you would never, ever use. There's no protocol for that. There's no precedent for that. There's no justification for that. And, she ultimately died of that. And there's another piece that I'm just starting to sort of piece together. It looks like what they did was they would keep the patient in the hospital long enough to get all the bonuses and drain them of their insurance money. And then as soon as they'd gotten they'd had them on for 96 hours, they'd gotten, they'd exhausted the insurance, then they would, give people too many sedatives and they'd be gone. To turn over the bed so they could get a new,
Yeah.
I would call them victims. They would call them patients. Erin Marie in New York City. And again, remember, let's say somebody is in a massive car wreck and they just have tremendous trauma. That's a person that you would vent. You don't vent somebody that's coming in with breathing difficulties that can be solved with oxygen through the nose.
Yeah.
And what Erin Marie told me is in this New York City operated hospital, as soon as somebody died, they'd get them, boom, they'd clean off the machine, they'd slap another person in there. She said the vents were never empty.
Sterilized?
And then the other grave problem, this thing, it's hard to explain it in a short bit because there's so many dimensions. The other grave problem was they didn't have respiratory therapists in sufficient number.
Okay.
And so you need one respiratory therapist for every 2 to 8 patients. Erin Marie and other people have reported to me they might have one respiratory therapist for the entire hospital, supervising 300 different people on vents. And they had a lot of people on vents in this New York City hospital. It was like a factory.
Wow. Wow.
And then related to this is two things happened. The government decreed, and this was done on a state by state level. The government holds the purse strings. The states, believe it or not, control how medicine is practiced in their states largely. But they don't, if they want money, they have to do what the federal government tells them to do. But
Sure.
They have a lot of leeway. And so various states put in total immunity. So anybody working with a COVID patient or one of the COVID hospitals or COVID ward basically had blanket immunity for anything that happened. Not a good idea.
Sure. Ken, we're at 31 minutes here. I got to put you in park for just a moment because you holy cow, the information you have is incredible. Can you stand by? Because like I said, I'm 44 seconds into this. Got to take a break. And can we talk about the role of media when we come back?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So for Huttcast, stand by. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Huttcast. Ken McCarthy has been giving us some intel. We're floored here at Huttcast. We're just like, wow. And what I wanted to cover is the role of the media. I mean, you've mentioned this in your book, in the tech companies and the silence in the healthcare professionals and the impact that this has on the public reception and the pandemic, which I call a plandemic, and how treatment methods used. So you covered about half of that, but you didn't go into the tech yet. So in a brief summary, give me some of that kung fu.
On the media's role in enabling this?
Yeah.
Could I ask you to indulge me? There's two really important things I'd like to say before we get to that.
Go ahead.
The technical. All right. So in addition to giving these hospitals blanket immunity, which is unprecedented in medical history, they also changed another group of laws on a state-by-state level, and that was to waive license requirements. So normally, let's say you're a brilliant doctor in Austria, or England, and you move to the United States. You don't get to practice medicine until you jump through 1,000 hoops. They waived all that. So they allowed doctors from all over the world to pour into the United States without really good due diligence on them. Some of them had tremendous English language problems, and many of them, the majority of them, the vast majority of them, did not have relevant medical experience. So you had podiatrists and gynecologists working in the ICUs.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and to use a plane analogy, an airplane analogy, let's say somebody can fly a Piper Cub, right? And we take them and we sit in front of a 747 jetliner and say, okay, you're going to fly this thing to England. Good luck.
Yeah,
That's exactly how reckless that is. And there was
with no
one of the
punitive.
elements. Pardon me?
Yeah, with no absolutely zero punitive.
Yeah, yeah, and you've got no liability for anything that happens. Um, in my state, I don't. And again, some of these things they're all state by state. The money comes from the feds, and they did the incentivization that way. But the actual devil was in the details at the state level. And speaking of devil, I understand you've got one hell of a governor. Um, who, I mean, I hope I'm not saying a bad thing here, but I've looked at this guy's record during COVID, and it's not good.
No, we're
But in
not.
any
We're
rate,
not proud
our
of that one.
terrible pardon me?
We're not proud of that, Governor.
Okay, good. Well, I don't think anybody's proud of their governors. I mean, Gavin Newsom, really, and Andrew Cuomo. Well, Andrew Cuomo put a blanket do not resuscitate order in across all ailments. So let's say you had a heart attack. There was an order that nobody, forget COVID, anybody that had any kind of problem that required resuscitation, there was a blanket do not resuscitate order. That was finally lifted after a couple of weeks. But that's the level of insanity. So we had foreign people coming in, and I've got nothing against foreign people, but we have these medical regulations for a reason because the different medical systems are different. Just pouring in, being paid enormous salaries. The nurses alone in the New York City hospitals were being paid $10,000 a week, the contract nurses.
Wow.
So who knows what the doctors were making?
Right, right.
So I mean, just imagine you're flown in, you're 5,000 miles away from home, you're making five figures a week, and you're being told do this and keep your head down. And now this is such an important point. Anybody that refused to go along was first pulled out of the ICU.
Yep.
And sent somewhere else. If they continued to make noise, they were fired. And now let's talk about the news media. This system included the deliberate targeting of nurses and doctors that spoke out. That was part of the system. So not only did they create the protocol, incentivize the protocol, enforce the protocol with an iron fist, they also had a system in place to go after we'll call them the dissenters. And one of the things that came up during the book, there were many organized troll groups. We're all familiar with the idea of trolls on the internet.
Yep.
If you've been around long enough, you know about flame wars, people that, misbehave but this is not what occurred. It was not natural. It was organized. It was planned. It was directed. And there were many groups that were doing this. One of them, most notoriously, is a group called Team Halo. And the amazing thing about Team Halo, and this almost sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, except we have the video of the actual UN Undersecretary of Communications. Team Halo was supported by the UN in conjunction with TikTok. And what they did was they gave basically white hat status to any member of Team Halo. In other words, your tweets, whatever you call a TikTok thing, your messages would never be censored. And on the surface, it was meant to fight disinformation. And what it was actually also used for was to very specifically and very viciously target individual nurses and doctors who were on social media trying to sound the alarm. So
Sure.
What they would do is, let's say Nicole Sorotek, who was the very first nurse who came out. We have an interview with her in the book, what the nurses saw. Actually, we have two interviews with her because she was so important. They found out her home address, and they disseminated that to this group of basically thugs and online terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
And these people would show up at her home. Now, she lives very rural in rural Nevada. You can't get much more rural than rural Nevada.
Sure.
And to have some strange people lurking around your home, very disturbing. They would take horrible photographs from the internet of injured children and paste pictures of her children on the faces and mail them to her, not email, but put them in the mail. And this was all facilitated by Team Halo, which got a grant. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Got a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation,
Oh, Jesus.
got a grant from some corporations, and was endorsed heartily by the UN Undersecretary of Communications. We've got the video of her coming out of her mouth, so it's not, this, we got her. Now, I doubt that they intended to do that, but they enabled it and they created the environment to do that. So basically, there were some paid people that went out and recruited these people, trained them, and set targets and cut them loose, and off they went. So that's how our news media participated in this.
Wow.
The tech giants, so called.
Your book touches on the ethical dilemmas faced by nurses. Now let's fast forward this. Could you elaborate on the moral conflicts that they experienced and how they navigated them?
Well, I mean, the sad reality, and this is not something that's a comforting thought, it was a very tiny percentage of nurses that stood up, like way less than 10%.
Wow.
Now, the nurses that I've interviewed said most, if not all, of my colleagues knew that there was something very, very wrong, and they just kept their heads down because they were afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of being demoted. And so it was a very, so the way you had different reactions. Some nurses were too inexperienced and too gung-ho and too drank the Kool-Aid to even realize what they were doing.
Sure. The
doctor said this, so we do it. That's my job. I'm supposed to do what the doctor tells me. I do what the doctor tells me. Oh, the patient died. It must have been COVID. So that's that level of just, abysmal ignorance.
Compliance,
Then you had another layer of nurses that knew this was just wrong, and they just kept their heads down and they did it. Not comforting to know. The ones that did fight back were very few and far between, and they stood up. They would say, I'm not, for instance, Nicole was told that we haven't even gotten into remdesivir. That's probably a whole other show. But they were forcing this failed Ebola drug on COVID patients. And it became obvious very quickly that it was causing organ failure, which they knew it would do because that's what happened when they tried to treat Ebola patients. But anyway, somehow by some magic, and Anthony Fauci was involved, he decreed in April that remdesivir was the cure, and it was going to be the only cure, the only treatment. So nurses, for instance, Nicole just refused. She said, I'm not hanging another remdesivir back. Done, not doing it. And, the doctor argued with her, the new nurse supervisor argued with her, the hospital administrator argued with her, and they just took her out of the ICU. Now, this was one of the few strong nurses in that particular hospital. She was an air nurse, which like air ambulance.
Sure. So she was the alpha.
Yeah, a true alpha. She'd worked in field hospitals in Syria for refugees. I mean, this is like, a 1%er.
Wow.
And someone, right? And so what did they do? For refusing to kill a patient,
they benched her.
They moved her to another floor where there were 7 other nurses sitting around with nothing to do because they too had been dissenting. So, I mean, what do you do? You speak up, you say no, you refuse. And a small percentage of them did do that. Now, there was another percentage that stayed on and did everything they could to mitigate harm, including helping families literally rescue their loved ones. So, for example, someone needed to go get an X-ray, so the nurse would sort of wheel the guy around and take him to the back exit of the hospital and call the family, because they'd been in touch with the family, and say, he's at this exit, come and get him now.
Wow. They rescued him. They did a rescue.
This is what happened. Wow. This is what happened. And I interviewed 8 nurses. I probably could have interviewed 8,000.
Oh, I bet.
And got the same story.
Isn't that incredible? Incredible information. Based on your findings, What implications do you believe your book has for the future of healthcare, especially in times of crisis? I mean, your book states it's pretty clear. Again, I read through it, but I did catch some certain things. And what do you hope to accomplish?
Oh, wow. Number one, get everybody to realize that these sort of individual deaths here and there that just seem to be bad luck or, strange, are part of a massive pattern that was created by a system that was consciously designed, incentivized, and enforced. And that's number one. Number two, people are still being killed this way. Okay, we don't have as many COVID diagnoses and as many COVID patients. But if somebody goes into a hospital with, quote, COVID, and they are in the wrong hospital with the wrong group, they are going to be put on this conveyor belt and they may not make it. We do have, by the way, some, not in the book, but post stuff that I've done, we do have testimony of people the few people that survived this protocol, and they're wrecked. I mean, they're just physically destroyed, and they're trying to recover from all that they were subjected to. So
Wow.
I want people to know that these individual cases like Scott and Grace, that's not one case. That is representative of tens or maybe hundreds of thousands. I don't know until some entity that has many millions of dollars does the research.
Well, Grace's father was more about, when I interviewed him, he was about the same protocol, of course, what you're speaking of, but because of her special needs, she was put on the back burner because of that. Do you feel that was some traction there?
Well, yeah, it appears that, all right, here's the news media. The news media kept promoting this absurd anti-scientific, anti-medical story that minorities and people with disabilities were more likely to die of COVID. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Especially for someone with Down syndrome, that they don't. Now, if somebody's got a battered immune system from some serious disease, or they've had a long lifetime of lung disorder, well, okay, I get that. But just because you're Black, or just because you're Native American, or just because you have some other kind of, like, let's say, a cognitive or developmental disability, why on earth would that make you more liable to die of COVID? And if I may say, those people, the people in those categories were easier to eliminate. For instance, in the hospitals in New York City, these are hospitals, public hospitals in poor neighborhoods, and you have a high percentage of minority people.
Okay.
Some brand new immigrants, some Hispanic people, Black people, and so I think the way they were covering the fact that a ridiculous percentage of people from those communities were dying of COVID, they were the low-hanging fruit. I hate to say it, but that seems to be the way they were thinking. And then the news media came in and said, "Oh, well, it's because COVID affects minorities more strongly." How does that make any biological sense?
Well, that ain't common sense. That don't even make any sense at any level. But yet they still push that narrative. Gracie was a situation where she fits the narrative, so we're going to continue that. Scott Quiner, he didn't have that problems, so why kill him there at Mercy?
Yeah. I mean, it's the hospitals. Someone made an interesting comment in an interview. They said, "Boy, it's hard to think that you can't trust your own doctor."
Oh yeah.
And that kind of triggered something in my mind that I had never thought about before. And I said, "You don't understand this. These are not your doctors.
Yeah.
This is not your doctor. This is a paycheck employee working for a hospital system, likely a hospital chain. And these are some of the most ruthless, cutthroat companies on earth. We all know the pharmaceutical companies are crooked and I'll even use the word perverted as hell. Mm-hmm. We all know that. I don't think we're as aware that these hospital companies are at least as bad, if not worse. So when you are being treated in a hospital, you have to be aware. And I'm not trying to scare people or terrorize people. But you need to know what the risks are. The doctor you're talking to is a paycheck employee.
Sure.
And he knows damn well the main thing that he has to satisfy to keep his job is exactly a hospital administrator.
It's interesting
and
how you put that.
You die in the process, but he gets away with it. It's no harm, no foul to him, at least.
It's interesting how you put that. Did you catch how you did that?
I don't know. How did I put it?
You said the hospital company. When you say hospital, it's a signal word. It's a directive of a place where you think you're going to get better, where they're advocating for you, which they aren't. But then you said company, like any other company.
I'm glad thank you for catching that. And it's something, the more of these conversations I have about the book, the more I understand the situation. In the olden days, I'm 64, and so part of this occurred when I was a little kid, but it's gone now. Hospitals used to be largely charitable organizations. They were set up as charities. Their goal was to help the community. A lot of religious groups would create hospitals, especially, for instance, the Catholic Church.
Right.
That's all gone now. This is all hyper corporatized. And the attitude is completely different.
Oh, for sure.
It's money, 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 money. And then you have the federal government coming along saying, look, if you give them remdesivir, we'll give you this bonus. If you put them on a vent, we'll give you this bonus. If you keep them on the vent for more than 96 hours, we'll give you this bonus. The hospital administrators are going, sounds good to me. And that's that. And then they were the enforcers. They were the ones that made it absolutely clear. If you want to keep your job in this hospital, you do what you're told. And if you speak up, you're out the door. Yep. And then the other group, Team Halo and all these fake disinformation fighting groups.
The militia group,
target any nurses and doctors that kept speaking.
Wow.
Yeah.
Any flashback? Anything that you're noticing from the medical community? Are they reaching out, or do you have a company chasing you around and putting babies' heads on your whatever?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Yeah, not yet. It hasn't got, the book's pretty new.
Okay.
It's selling nicely, but not wildly. But I have a feeling this story is so compelling. And for the time being, there's nowhere else to get this story. There's not like you can, get another book or read some articles or go listen to some podcasts. And like this book is it. For now. So I have a feeling it's going to get more and more traction. I'm pretty sure as soon as it gets traction, I'll be personally attacked.
Oh, for sure. Dr. Scott Jensen, ring a bell?
What's that?
Dr. Scott Jensen, ring a bell?
Oh, yeah, the great Scott Johnson.
Yeah, he's been in the show a couple times.
Oh, really? That's great. And I'd like to talk about Minnesota. By amazing coincidence, I'm a marketing fellow, and part of my business was training people in marketing, especially in the internet marketing stuff. And one of my old students is a guy named David Farr, who happened to end up co-founding Mask Off Minnesota. So I've been tracking Minnesota very carefully. And there's another group, and I can't, of course my computer is frozen, but I believe it's medicaljusticeMN.org, Medical Justice Minnesota. And this is a very important group. I hope all Minnesotans will go to this website and learn what this group is doing. They're basically seeking justice for families who had their loved ones killed using these protocols. And they are I have a pretty good sense of what's going on around the country, and they're doing the best job that I've seen anywhere in the country. So
Minnesota's at front, huh?
Pardon me?
Minnesota's at front.
Absolutely. And Minnesota has one little thing in its favor. Most of these states have a 2-year window of opportunity to file a wrongful death or medical malpractice lawsuit. Minnesota has 3 years. So unfortunately, this thing happened in the dark. They were picking off victims in the dark one at a time, and nobody saw the pattern. And now the pattern finally is starting to emerge. Obviously Scott Sherrard's work and some other people's work, and now this book is showing, oh no, this was a pattern. Unfortunately, statute of limitations has run its course in most states. Minnesota has 1 extra year. So a lot is being geared up to try to get legal justice for these people that were killed this way. So this is a very, very, very important group. They're new. They're very capable. They're dedicated as heck. I mean, you won't find harder working people on the planet ever doing anything. And I say that as a guy that's been in business for over 40 years. I would hire any of these people tomorrow to do anything with me because they're so dedicated. But they need help with their fellow citizens.
Ken, how do we find your book?
Oh, well, go to my website. It's called whatthenursessaw.com, whatthenursessaw.com. And right on the homepage, there's a big button you can hit, order the book, and then you can get the book that way. You can also join our news list, and I encourage people that consider this an important story to join our news list, because we do have a lot of additional things we need to tell people, largely in an activist, organizing way, because I'm a business guy. I'm not into yakking about problems, right? We've laid the problem out on the table. I'm into solving problems. So I'm working very closely now with Medical Justice MN.org, helping them organizationally, helping them with their promotions, just helping them as an entity, And I'd like people to join the list. Of course, I'd like people to buy the book. I want to encourage people to buy more than one copy. Your library needs one. You may have a family member or a neighbor or a community member or a fellow church member who needs this book. They may have a sense that something happened to their loved one they don't understand. This book will show them that they're not crazy, because the medical profession is genius at gaslighting.
Oh, right? Big time.
Oh, you're making things up. You're imagining it. No, nothing is imagined about this. Same patterns over and over again. Multiple witnesses, multiple states, veteran nurses, and on it goes. I mean, this is I could have written an encyclopedia. It's just a 491-page book.
So Ken, tough question here. Now, it's in your book. Based on the information that you've talked to the nurses, and everybody's got a nurse in the family, everybody's talked to them people, some ignored it. What is the best advice that you would offer to nurses in the healthcare profession who might find themselves in a similar situation in the future?
Well, here's something that we all need to know. This kind of thing, not on this scale, has been going on for a long time. As our medical system has degenerated, and I don't think there's any question that it's degenerated, and it's degenerated because you can see that our life expectancy is shortening. You can see that these hospital companies are getting super rich. You can see that our medical costs in this country are twice the medical cost per capita of any other country on earth. The second leading one is Switzerland.
Wow.
We sure don't have Swiss healthcare in the United States. So this was a problem before COVID. This will be a problem after COVID. This is not related only to COVID. The pushing of medical interventions that are not called for but happen to make the cash register ring is a big thing. So we all, Marcus Welby's gone. The local charity hospital staffed by, is gone. We all have to raise our intelligence about medicine and science. That's one of the things that I want to do with my list for people that want to know more. People need to learn, and we're folding this into Medical Justice MN.org. They need to know what medical advocacy is. They need to learn how to advocate for themselves, how to think through medical problems. We can't, if you go buy a used car, and I never thought of this analogy before. We all know when we go to buy a used car, we better have our wits about us, or we're going to get, taken advantage of dramatically, right? Unfortunately, that is the case with the medical system. You have to go in forearmed. Now, there's a new profession which we are going to help promote and support, because it's not brand new, but it's a profession that needs greater profile, and that is the medical advocacy
program. Yeah,
right? Because you can be a nurse, you can be a doctor, and if you get in the clutches of one of these systems, you too can be swept away, even with all your knowledge and all your expertise. So there are professionals who are advocates. They're largely nurses, and they will call the hospital and say, "Hey, I see what you're planning to do with this person. Can you explain to me why? And why you haven't looked at this option and that option and this option?" In other words, being your spokesman. It's like, if you have a legal problem, you pretty much need to get a lawyer.
Yes.
Right? It's not pleasant, but you got to do it.
You need your car fixed, you get a mechanic.
Exactly. Unless you can fix your own car, but generally, especially these new cars, you can't fix. You need someone that has it. Right? And I think we need to start, all of us need to start thinking, okay, if me or one of my loved ones is in a not trivial medical situation, I may need to think about calling a nurse advocate, a medical advocate, to explain things to me, to go to bat with me to the nurse, to the hospital, to the doctors.
Ask the questions we don't know.
And rep you, and just be your. Because here's the thing: the terrible thing is this industry, by necessity, catches us at our most vulnerable.
Yep.
We're not. That's why we're talking to them, because we're sick or we're not. Things are going wrong. And it's a terrifying thing if it's a serious problem.
And you hope they're doing they hope you're for them, and you're hoping that they're your advocate, but they're not. They're the hospital business company.
Yep.
Gareth Care is one of our suppliers. They've been on the show. They're one of our. They're just great sponsors. That's who we use here. Or Great Care, they call it.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, they have a great reputation among the nurses that I've spoken with.
So all the people you're talking about has already either been on the show, which I am in constant contact with, and they're great people. So for us, that's who we would call.
Okay, well, I had no idea, but this companies like that who provide that kind of service, we all need to become acquainted with in the event that we need it. And that could make all the difference in the world. So if you want to know what's the takeaway, we all need to get smarter, stronger, and we need to start looking for allies. And the point that you made, which is so great, is these are hospital companies. And they're hospital mega corporations is what they are.
Right.
And they have all the care and heart of a medical, of any corporation, The bigger, I find, I don't know the bigger the organization, the more likely it is to be heartless and corrupt.
Right. Right.
And some of these medical groups are massive, but it doesn't have to be a massive group. It could just be a single standalone hospital.
So in your opinion, have the events and practice you described in your book affect the public trust in the healthcare system and its professionals? I mean, you touched on it, but in a nutshell, should we trust them?
The old Ronald Reagan thing, trust but verify. I wouldn't walk around with a chip on my shoulder. I mean, try not to. It's hard not to once you know these facts, but I would behave cordially, but verify everything. Why are you recommending this procedure? Or, what are the actual risks of this procedure? And a lot of these guys, doctors, love to just gloss over things. You need to know, hey, you're recommending this procedure. Is it the only cure? Is it the only way to treat this thing? What are the positive outcomes? What's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow if this procedure works 100% right? How many times does it work? What are the downsides? What can go wrong? How many times does it go wrong? And you actually even need to know how many times it goes wrong with an individual doctor. Because there may be a procedure that's perfectly fine, it's perfectly called for. And this guy's got he's a butcher.
Yeah, you got the janitor doing it.
I'll tell you a true story. I was hired to write ad copy years ago for a very cutting edge, innovative eye surgery tool for removing cataracts. And so in order to learn really this thing and how it worked, I went to the training where they were training eye doctors in how to use this tool. And so I grabbed the tool and we're working on dead eyes from rabbits, okay? Not live people. And I'm telling you, half those guys I wouldn't trust with a pick and shovel to dig a hole, let alone work on my eyes. Just looking around the room. And let me give a little secret. If somebody's going to do an operation on you, find out who makes the tool and find out who they hire to go train other doctors to use the tool, because that will be one of the best users of that tool. But see, these are the kinds of things people never talk about, never think about. We think all doctors are the same, and there's a wide range of competence, and there's a lot of things you need to know. So anytime they want to do something invasive, you got to do your homework, or call an advocate and have them do the research and explain it to you. Very important. Very, very important.
Ken, we're 31 minutes, 47 seconds into the second segment, and I want to respect your time. What's your takeaway? We're in 72 countries now. We have 45 million plus followers. What do you want to tell these guys? The floor is yours.
Well, I think I said it all. For more information, you can go to whatthenursessaw.com, where you can order the book. You can see some of our supporting documentation. You can join our list. But we all have to grow. It's childhood's end. We can't just blithely trust our medical system. Our medical system has serious, serious problems. Some things they do very well, but just like I'm going to say, just like when you go to buy a used car, that's kind of the mindset you need to have when you go and interact with the medical system, because they are I'm not taking anything away from used car sales, but I'm sure there's a lot of good ones. But you know what I'm saying? It's a profession like anything else, but there are bad ones, and they're almost legendary. So you have to have that kind of smarts to you. And if you don't feel you have it, I do recommend that you investigate the various advocacy services, because it could save your life, it could save your health, it could save you some money, situation, and save money too.
Yeah. Ken, thank you for taking your morning out here and giving us an update on this. I appreciate that. I hope the book sells wonderfully. You'll get a link into a text. It'll be a private link, and you can share it to whomever you want. And Godspeed to you on this.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, for Huttcast, we're going to pull the pin here. We'll give it some post-roll, but pay attention to what he said. Let's learn some stuff, and for God's sakes, be your own advocate. Huttcast, signing off. And that's a wrap for Huttcast. Huttcast is, again, a pragmatic approach to seeing things how some people see them. If you like our show, give us a thumbs up on the Facebook site. Again, for Huttcast, thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.